Newsfirst.lk.
And a very good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And it's a wonderful day again. Yesterday it was smashingly hot, and no doubt everybody was using their air conditioners. So the electricity board got their work cut out. Wonderful. Anyway, this morning, we've got Sabrina Esuffaly, Head of Legal at Rti Research with us. Very good morning to you.
Thank you.
Esuffaly. Nice to have you back here on our set, and it's new to you, isn't it, this set?
Yes, it is. It's looking quite swanky.
Thank you, thank you. Our dear Manoj will be happy. Now then, the Right to Information Act, as it's now, I think it was a bill last time.
It was just about an act, yeah.
Last time. So, how is it doing?
So the Right to Information became operationalized in February this year. So it's almost been a year since it's been kind of alive and kicking.
Yeah.
It's still early days to kind of give a prescriptive analysis on how it's doing.
Yeah.
But, you know, a user of the Right to Information and someone that's very interested in it, I've been tracking kind of its implementation over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And let me start with what I think is one of the biggest positives that I see with the Act. And strangely, it's not even about the supply of information. Mm-hmm. It's really about how information is perceived.
Right.
So previously, you know, access to government information depended on calling up your friend in government or paying someone off to get even basic pieces of information that you need to run your business, or you know, if you were doing research to try and uncover some data. Mm-hmm. But now, a lot of people are finding that the right to information is a good way to circumvent that uncomfortable process.
Right.
And so that I really see that there's this sense of entitlement that's attached to government information. That, to me, is the biggest and most important shift in a Right to Information Act. If we can leverage on that shift, this idea that, you know, government information really belongs to the public, and the public are custodians of this government information, and therefore they should really have a right to it. It's, you know, it's not something that's to be contested, not something that's to be guarded. And I think that I see that more prominently now, and I'm really happy about how the Right to Information has changed the conversation. It's no longer about, you know, I'm keeping all this information from you because, you know, I own it. It's about, this is why I can't give it to you.
So, so the tip of the iceberg has been cracked, but it's not all there.
Yeah, I'm by no means, you know, saying that it's a perfectly functional system. And just from my experience, there are, so under the Right to Information, you have the right for the information officer to reply you with a yes or no, can I give you this information, in 14 days. And in 14 days after that, you have the right to actually get the information. Now, this month or so timeline is not frequently complied with.
Yes, that's why I was coming to this now. Now, for example, I wonder, this question is sort of time sensitive because the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the issuance of bonds we're told that there are another two more sittings left, and they had a 6-week extension, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we're coming perilously close to the end of this Commission of Inquiry. And I know all good things must come to an end, but I would like to know what the questions posed by the commissioners were to the Prime Minister, and I would also like to know what his responses were. Because if he turned up in court, I would have known that, because it would become a matter of public record. And so I wonder, is there provision as head of legal for you to tell me, is there provision for the commissioners to say, all right, then this is what was said, and publish that?
So interestingly, we actually tried to get a hold of some information that the Commission is reviewing at the time.
Right.
And so the response that we got was that they couldn't disclose it under the RTI Act.
Right.
And really when I looked, so the RTI Act, you can only deny information based on very specific grounds.
Right.
And these grounds are set out under Section 5 of the Act.
Right.
Now, one of those grounds is if the information disclosed would result in a contempt of court.
Right.
Now, the Commission of Inquiry is not a court.
Exactly. It's a fact-finding mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason then that the information that it's considering or its proceedings should be made public.
Yes.
So I think looking at the exceptions and looking at the legitimate basis on which you can deny information and citizens being able to scrutinize that is very important.
Indeed. So you haven't had a response yet?
No, so we've actually got the information request denied. So now the question is, do we appeal to the Right to Information Commission or not?
Now then, we had Minister Lakshman Kiriyalla responding in a completely unacceptable way. That's my opinion. But the point is, he said he had 400 million in his bank account and that his family had 30,000 acres of land at some point. I want to find out if that's true for my own personal self. Now, I had one guy, one of my assistants, go and spend an entire day, I think it was called Rti, and I had to pay him. And unknown to me, Sonali Wanigwajge, head of our legal team here on Newsfirst floor, also had sent people and had initiated a process. Nevertheless, we've so far not received this thing. I know that when Sonali is representing us, gets it, she can't really discuss it with anyone. That's a quirk in that law. But the point is that it's well over 2 weeks now. We haven't got it, and I think we've appealed. We as in the team here. So what can we do about things like that? So
actually, even before the Right to Information was enacted, there was this law called the Assets and Liabilities Law. So essentially, every parliamentarian and certain categories of public officers have to disclose their assets and liabilities to Parliament faithfully. And any citizen is eligible, I think, through a payment of under 1,000 rupees, to pay this fee and get access to a copy of the person's assets and liabilities. Now, the only glitch in that process is that while I can get that piece of information that details people's assets and liabilities, I can't share it with you. So there is actually a blanket ban on publication.
Well, what happens when you, as head of legal at Rti, what happens? Can you not call your colleagues into the conference room and have a look open the envelope and have a look at it?
No.
You're breaking the law, aren't you?
But that's under the Assets and Liabilities Law. Now, the Right to Information Law has a provision that says this act shall supersede all laws that came before it. Right? So presumably it supersedes the Assets and Liabilities Law, it supersedes the blanket ban on publication, and technically, because we've already had a law in place and a process in place where public officials have to submit their assets and liabilities, it is obviously not prohibited under the Right to Information Law. So
let me get, that's a very important point you're making. Under the Right to Information Act, nothing in that act precludes you from sharing that information with me.
Nope.
And nothing.
So it's also the question of how you file it, right? So you don't file it through the Assets and Liabilities Law process, because once you file it through that process,
then you're subject to those rules.
Exactly. But if you file it as a Right to Information request, now that's a different story. Of course, I think Transparency International is kind of debating this question at the Right to Information Commission right now. So hopefully I'll have a clearer answer for you. But it stands to reason that that if you file it
So, if I was to be mischievous and I wanted to test the law to its fullest extent and its reach, then would it be foolhardy of me or to get hold of one of these asset declarations under the RTI and publish it in a newspaper?
Please do.
Right, because then for them to stop it,
Yeah.
they would have to go to
So actually, interestingly, the backstory behind the drafting of the Rti Act is
Yeah.
that the first draft that we reviewed, I think, was February 2015,
Yeah.
had a clause that said any information that is, got under this particular act shall not be published.
I
So
see.
again, getting into that same trap that we see over and over again,
Right.
where information once got is really vaulted.
Right.
But over time, through a series of consultations, through people working really hard,
Yeah.
this clause got removed.
Right.
So I think we must not forget the
Yeah.
fight that was fought to ensure that everything that is got under the right to information
Yeah.
becomes a public value.
Right.
And I think that, and so I think that more initiatives of the media using the right to information to really tell important stories about
Yeah.
public accountability is key.
You know your phone's going to ring off its, whatever, when this program, the effects of what you've said, is now doing its rounds already, no doubt. And that is that under the RTI, there is nothing to preclude us from discussing somebody's asset declaration.
Nope, absolutely not.
Wonderful. That's an absolutely exclusive, because I don't think many people knew that. And there you go. All the lawyers in you out there, you can debate that today, because no doubt very soon some newspaper, some media institution will use that, and will start publishing asset declarations, which is absolutely wonderful news. Because Sabrina, if I want to find out the member's interest, which is I think the same thing. In the British, of a member of the British Parliament, I can do that. I can actually do it now online, and it'll be all there.
Yep.
And
it should be.
And exactly, and it should be. I met somebody who's the head of a large county council, also in the UK, and he told me that ahead of any meeting he would have with a supplier or somebody like that, he had to post that on their website, and also then after the event post again, and if he spent any money, he'd have to put that in.
Yep.
And I thought that was transparency at its best.
And that's also a really interesting kind of dimension of right to information that you just brought up.
Yeah.
Is this idea? So one way you can get information is through going out there, filing requests,
Yeah.
Pleading with the public authority
Yeah.
to grant it to you, invalidating their reasons for denial. So it's a very active kind of process, right?
Right.
But there's also this other dimension of right to information that goes completely unnoticed, and that is proactive disclosure.
Right.
That is the obligation on ministries and public authorities to proactively publish categories of information. Now, particularly information relating to interests, particularly financial information.
Yeah.
So, for example, on budget promises,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So, Rti has done a study where we'd like to talk more about budget implementation than
Yeah.
budget promises,
Yeah.
because you know that once the budget promises are made, things change all the time. Some
Right.
things don't happen, and when we go into the next budget cycle, we have very little visibility on how we've done in the past.
Yeah.
So actually, we started on a process to try and track the implementation of budget promises over the last year,
Yeah.
and looking at promises over 1 billion.
Right.
So actually, what we found was quite startling. We found that over 51%
Yeah.
of budget promises were not disclosed. So we didn't have a clue whether they were implemented or not.
No.
So the fact that a majority of budget promises are not or the implementation of it are not disclosed to the public, to me is an absolute travesty.
Absolutely.
And this idea that not only does the government have to do what it's say what it's doing, but it also has to do what it's saying, right? Yeah. And I think that this idea of budget transparency or transparency with regard to where your money is going is key. Even if you look at go to the tender process, right? Yes. In most other countries, from the issuance of a tender notice to the award of the bid, all of those processes are public. Successful awards are made public. Now look at the recent petrol crisis, right?
That's right.
Things were procured on an emergency basis. Yeah. Do we know at what price they were procured? Right. Do we know who they were procured from? All of that information should actually be out there and is required to be out there through proactive disclosure. And interestingly, under the Act, a minister is required to publish a report, so yearly and 6 months after the Act. So we're looking at August, there was meant to be a report that was out that details budgets, that details expenditure, that details people. We've checked all 55 ministries or their websites of all of the ministries. Yeah. Not one ministry has published their report. Not one.
I see. That's absolutely shocking. And whose responsibility is this? Is it the ministry secretary? Is it the minister? Is it the information officer?
So it's called the minister's report, and the obligation is on the minister.
On the minister. Yeah. Right. And not on the ministry.
No, it says it's on the minister.
It's rather narrow. Yeah. Well, that's another thing that we will need to have a look at. We'll go for a short break and then come right back because we've got loads of questions from our viewers. Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Welcome back to Newsline, and we're here with Sabrina Esuffaly, Head of Legal at Rti Research. Ms. Esuffaly, very, very interesting things that that you brought to our notice, and that's very good. You ought to come here more often. Now then, I really want to ask you again. Under the RTI, there is nothing wrong in getting hold of an MP's asset declaration and disclosing it for everyone and all and sundry to read and write about. Wonderful. Well, I'm sure everyone will do that. There's lots and lots of questions here from our viewers. Everyone wants to know whether they're all asking about the same thing, really, about this right to information. And what you said about the budget is also equally exciting, because why is they not disclosing that? They've now introduced yet another budget. So what's our stand on that?
So I think that it's important, because there is so little that we know in terms of how the government has done in relation to progress on its promises. The question is the budget for the people? Should the people participate in evaluating kind of the government's fiscal promises? Assuming that 51% of progress is not disclosed in relation to budget implementation, does the ministry that is coming up with the budget even have the right information, even have the right numbers? So how are they predicting how much money they're allocating? What is the basis?
Right.
So that there are all big question marks there. But interestingly, I was just having a look at the budget proposals to see how much the Right to Information Commission was given. Right? This commission that is meant to hear appeals, that is meant to really safeguard the right to information, because you need an independent commission to oversee it. Yeah. Right? So the commission is doing a really good job of hearing appeals, of ensuring that it's dealing with technical points in the RTI law. Yeah. It's giving advice to public authorities on whether to disclose particular types of information. So it performs a really important role in the context of right to information and its success. But but it's allocated a 41 million in the budget. Just to give you a sense of how to compare it, the former president Mahinda Rajapaksa and the former president Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga together get 42 million through the budget
per annum.
Yeah.
When you say they get, that's a total.
They get allocated, yeah.
So the two of them.
Yeah, or it's proposed in the.
So what would that cover? All their security costs?
That it would cover security, living. Like it's kind of like a retirement benefit.
It's like their pension.
Yeah, yeah.
But what about security and all that? Do those costs get deducted?
That would get deducted. So I don't actually have the budget doesn't give you a detailed breakdown
That's the point.
Exactly. So it has capital and recurrent expenditure.
Right.
That's how budgets are set out. But if you want more detailed information on exactly where this money is going, that's a really good RTI request to file.
I see.
Because we know the number is significant. We just don't know how it's broken down.
Right. And we can find out whether they deduct things like for the rent, for the electricity, and so forth. And perhaps that's why they don't understand this thing about energy security, because if it's free and they're getting everything for free and it's working 24/7, they wouldn't even know that there's a power cut or that there's a water cut. Some people say here that in the United Kingdom, under the Freedom of Information Act, all requests, whether successful or not, are published on the internet at www.whatdotheyknow.com. And so, obviously, a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Do we have anything remotely like that?
So, actually, under the regulations published under the Right to Information Act, all public authorities are required to publish prior disclosures of information. So, it's prior disclosures of information and questions that are asked.
Right.
Again, looking at actually all of the public authority ministry websites, I couldn't find. I mean, some had a tab saying prior disclosures of information, but there was nothing there. Yeah, they've made a start.
Right, so they know all the ramifications.
Yeah, and it's actually a requirement under the regulations, which is a really good thing.
Right to information is good, but more importantly, information should not be abused by using it in favor of one party or of a particular color. This is evident, and so on and so forth. This is evident in many media organizations, according to one of our viewers. But what do you do? So
I think that ultimately filing a right to information request is driven by a particular interest.
Yes.
Right? So I would rather that criticism be driven with information and data rather than opinions, which is where we're at now.
Right,
now, if we want to criticize someone, it's entirely in the realm of gossip or opinion.
Yes,
we need to move to a world in which we criticize the things that we don't like, the people that we don't like, based on data that we know.
Indeed.
And that's why right to information is important.
Under the Assets and Liabilities Act, this provides for a person to pay and obtain copies of a declaration. If denied, can't one file an FR case?
You could try.
Yeah.
But I think, but you can actually file a case under the Assets and Liabilities law, right? Saying that the Gazette provides that if you pay this particular fee, that you can get access to assets and liabilities, right? So I don't, and actually we've been successful with getting assets and liabilities in the past through paying that fee.
Right.
For me, the fundamental issue isn't so much about getting access to that particular information.
Right.
It's actually being required not to share it.
Right.
And so I think the system, we've tried it, and it's definitely, if the assets and liabilities have been filed, we have been able to access it. It's just the question of I can't tell you about it, which is really the problem.
The many questions. Under the RTI, can a person's tax declaration be requested?
So under the RTI, personal information that is of no value to public interest cannot be disclosed.
Right.
Say, for example, if it relates to third-party information, so a tax file, for example, the third party has to be consulted before that declaration is made public. But although that exception exists in the Act, it's important to recognize that all of these exceptions have a general public interest override clause. So this idea that really if the public interest in disclosure is greater than the harm that's likely to be caused by this particular information being disclosed, you potentially have a good chance to access it.
And another one wants to know, does the right to information also apply to private companies?
No, it does not apply to private companies. So, for example, if they have a state ownership in excess of 25%, the Right to Information Act would apply, but it doesn't apply to completely private companies.
So if this company had, God forbid, if the government had more than a 25% stake here, then it would be subject to that. Right.
But actually, if you look at disclosures of companies listed on the stock market. Right? The Right to Information Act doesn't demand anything more onerous of you than things that you would disclose to the stock market.
Yes.
So
the finance minister announced to the media that a budget implementation committee has been appointed to report on a monthly basis the progress of implementation of budget proposals. This was never done before. What is your opinion of that?
I'm waiting for it to take off, because this is something that budget implementation has been something that's very important to Rti.
Yes, so we'd like to see if even that is being implemented.
Yeah, and hopefully, and we'll keep following this space very closely.
Indeed, indeed. And somebody's saying, thank you, Mr. Esuffaly, for educating the masses on RTI and the difference between RTI and the Assets and Liabilities Act. There's thousands of who do not have a clue about these sort of things. And another one pointing out that Lakshman Kiriyalla couldn't have owned more than 50 acres of land after the Land Reform Act. True, well, that's why we want to find out. And as we come towards the end of this morning, I'd also like to ask you, Sabrina Esuffaly, the Commission of Inquiry into the Bonds has got 2 days, and today is one of those 2 days, 2 sittings left. And today they expect to have a person who's a specialist on audio recordings, and they are due to make an announcement, and there is much speculation that the Prime Ministers may come, and that this date is being sort of preserved for our dear Prime Minister to arrive. Forgetting all that, in terms of transparency, how important is it for the person in charge of the Ministry of the Central Bank, and that is the Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, happens to be the Prime Minister. How important is that for transparency?
In terms of
transparency, for him to come out there, like you said, I don't know. You filed a request which has been denied, and now you're wondering, should we appeal? I want to know. I really do want to know what my Prime Minister went and said in his sworn affidavit, and he's making a song and dance about it. He says, well, and today's Daily Mirror says that he reiterates his readiness to go before the Commission, and now he's trying to put the blame on the Commission. I'm a member of the public. I really do want to know what Ranil Wickremesinghe said.
And I think that it is really that energy that you need to drive in to an RTI process, because you need to have stamina, right? We had to call a number of times. I mean, when we filed RTI requests, I mean, it's not a passive process where you file a request and then you forget about it. In these early stages, it's important that you keep driving, that as many people as possible keep driving the question home, and keep reinforcing. And in higher authorities like the President's Office and the Prime Minister's Office, and the Ministry of Defense, and even probably the Aegis Department, there's a higher level of scrutiny and a higher level of anxiety about information. And so those are kind of authorities that it would be a little bit more difficult to get information from. So I think that acknowledging that means that you have to fight a little harder to get the information that you want.
Of course, Sabrina Esuffaly, you do know that some media organizations, ours certainly, never needed a RTI to expose the things that we did, because we've been tickling the conscience of people. Whistleblowers have been blowing loud and clear, and even the Bond owes a lot to those wonderful men and women at the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance and so on, who whistle blew slowly and slowly, but they certainly blew a whistle.
And actually, in a very, not to the fullest extent that we'd like to see, whistleblowers are protected under the Right to Information Act.
See.
So I think it's important to keep reinforcing and strengthening this protection if media organizations like you truly value the input of whistleblowers.
Absolutely. Sabrina Esuffaly, it's been wonderful having you on the program. Do come back perhaps in about 10 weeks, shall we say?
Definitely, yeah.
And tell us what
made me commit to that on air. Now I can't back down.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, and it's wonderful, and it has been a refreshing. You've been a refreshing guest here.
Thank you.
Thank you, and our viewers, if you've enjoyed the program today, do send us a text message, SMS 0772 300 305. Just a thumbs up will do. Take care. God bless.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.